Most people think they understand confidence. They think it comes from success, hype, or believing you're better than everyone else. But what if confidence actually comes from something heavier, something most people would break under? That's the part almost nobody understands about Shedeur Sanders. Because long before the NFL, before draft debates, before social media clips dissecting his tone or body language, Shedeur was already living in a world where nothing he did was ever neutral. Every throw was expected. Every mistake was magnified. Every win came with an asterisk, not because of football, but because of his last name. When Cam Newton sat down with Shedeur, he didn't ask about arm strength or mechanics. He went straight to the thing most fans avoid talking about. He told Shedeur something that stopped the conversation cold: your entire life has been a weight on your shoulders. And that one sentence explains more about Shedeur Sanders than any stat sheet ever could. Most rookie quarterbacks experience real pressure for the first time when they reach the league. The cameras, the criticism, the feeling that one bad moment can define you. For them, it's shocking. For Shedeur, it's familiar. He didn't step into pressure, he grew up inside it. Being the son of Deion Sanders meant the world never saw him as just a kid learning the game. He was always being measured against something bigger, something louder, something legendary, and that created a lose-lose reality most people never survive mentally. Say nothing and you're soft, speak up and you're arrogant, succeed and it's handed to you, fail and it proves what critics wanted all along. And yet Shedeur never cracked. That's why this conversation matters. Because once you understand the pressure he's been carrying since childhood, you start to realize why this moment doesn't scare him, and why the league might be dealing with a quarterback who's been mentally ready far longer than anyone wants to admit. But that pressure didn't just come from the outside, it was engineered at home. Most quarterbacks don't truly understand pressure until they reach the NFL. That's when the cameras multiply, the opinions get louder, and every throw suddenly feels like a referendum on your future. For many rookies, that moment is shocking. It rattles them, some never recover. But for Shedeur Sanders, that moment never existed because pressure didn't arrive one day, it was always there. When Cam Newton sat across from Shedeur and said, "Your whole life has been a weight on your shoulders," it wasn't exaggeration. It was a summary. From the time Shedeur was a kid, nothing about his life was normal. Every move was watched, every success was expected, every failure was amplified, not because of what he did, but because of who his father is. Being the son of Deion Sanders meant Shedeur was never just another quarterback coming up through the system. He was always Prime's son first. That label followed him everywhere: youth football, high school, college, and eventually the draft process. And that kind of constant comparison does something to a person. For most players, confidence has to be built over time. It comes from proving yourself again and again. But Shedeur didn't get that luxury. He grew up knowing that no performance would ever be taken at face value. If he played well, critics said it was because of his dad. If he struggled, it was proof he didn't belong. There was never a clean win. That creates a different kind of mental toughness. Shedeur explained it in a way that most people overlooked. He said, when something is consistent your entire life, it stops feeling like pressure. It becomes normal. Expectations don't feel heavy when you've never known anything else. The microscope doesn't scare you when you've lived under it since childhood. That's what separates him from the rest of his draft class. Other quarterbacks are learning how to tune out noise for the first time. Shedeur mastered that skill years ago. While others are trying to figure out how to respond to criticism, he already knows when silence is power and when confidence gets mistaken for arrogance. This is the part fans and analysts keep missing. They look at Shedeur and see confidence. They assume it's manufactured or entitled or forced. But what they're really seeing is someone who was shaped by non-stop pressure long before the NFL ever entered the picture. And once you understand that, everything else about his approach starts to make sense, because the weight everyone else fears is the same weight that trained him. Here's the part of Shedeur's story that almost nobody talks about, and it completely flips the privileged kid narrative on its head. Yes, Shedeur Sanders grew up with access most kids could only dream of. A massive house, endless space, every amenity you could imagine. On the surface, it looked like the perfect setup. The kind of environment critics point to when they say, "Of course he's confident, look where he came from." But that version of the story leaves out the most important detail. That lifestyle didn't last. At a point when most parents would lean into comfort and stability, Deion Sanders did the opposite. He moved his family out of a massive mansion and into a much more regular home. Still nice, but nowhere near the world they were used to, and it wasn't about money, it was about mindset. The message was simple but powerful: comfort can make you forget who you are. When you grow up with something your entire life, you don't see it as special. It feels normal, and that's dangerous. Because once you start believing your environment is guaranteed, you stop developing hunger. You stop appreciating struggle. You lose the edge that separates talented players from resilient ones. That move wasn't punishment, it was preparation. It taught Shedeur something most athletes never learn until it's too late: that nothing is permanent. That success can be taken away just as fast as it's given. And that your confidence can't be tied to where you live, what you drive, or what people think you have access to. This is where a lot of the misunderstanding comes from. When people see Shedeur celebrate success now, the jewelry, the cars, the confidence, they assume it's entitlement. But what they're actually seeing is someone who remembers life before the access. Someone who understands how rare opportunity really is. Someone who knows exactly what it feels like to have comfort removed on purpose. That lesson sticks. It's why pressure doesn't faze him. It's why losing a starting role, dealing with criticism, or being doubted publicly doesn't shatter his confidence. He learned early that environments change, opinions shift, and status is fragile. The only thing that stays with you is how you respond. Most quarterbacks enter the NFL having never had anything taken from them. Shedeur already has. And that's why when the game gets uncomfortable, when expectations rise and the noise gets loud, he doesn't panic. Because he's already lived through the moment most players fear. And that foundation didn't just shape how he plays the game, it shaped how he survives it. This is where the story really breaks away from the narrative people think they know. When most fans hear the name Shedeur Sanders, they assume he grew up inside a protective bubble, elite private schools, hand-picked teammates, and an environment designed to guarantee success. That assumption couldn't be more wrong. Despite having every reason to isolate his kids from reality, Deion Sanders did the opposite. Shedeur didn't spend his entire childhood surrounded by privilege and insulation. He went to regular schools, charter schools that weren't well-funded, environments where his last name didn't automatically earn respect and sometimes did the opposite. That matters more than people realize. Being prime son didn't make life easier in those settings, it made it harder. Expectations followed him everywhere, but protection didn't. He had to interact with kids who didn't care about NFL legacies, teachers who treated him like everyone else, peers who tested him, questioned him, and sometimes resented him. There was no shield from criticism, no special treatment waiting to catch him if he stumbled. That kind of upbringing forces self-awareness early. Shedeur learned how to read rooms, how to navigate personalities, how to carry himself without leaning on his father's name, and most importantly, how to stay grounded when the world keeps projecting assumptions onto you. He wasn't raised to believe he was better than anyone else, he was raised knowing he'd be judged harder than everyone else. This is the missing context behind so much of the criticism he gets today. When people online complain about his confidence or point to his lifestyle now, they're ignoring the years he spent without access, without answers, without shortcuts. Shedeur didn't grow up knowing how wealth works. He didn't have a roadmap handed to him. He learned by watching, by listening, and by experiencing the difference between perception and reality firsthand. That's why he celebrates success the way he does. Not to flex, not to prove anything, but because he remembers what it felt like to be on the outside of that world. He remembers not having information, not having leverage, not having options, and once you've lived without those things, you don't take them lightly when they finally arrive. Most quarterbacks entering the NFL have lived highly controlled football lives, carefully managed, carefully protected, carefully packaged. Shedeur was. He grew up in real environments with real people facing real reactions. That's why he doesn't fold under scrutiny. That's why criticism doesn't feel personal. And that's why when pressure shows up, it doesn't feel foreign. Because he wasn't raised in a bubble. He was raised in reality, and that's a preparation advantage no scouting report can measure. This is the part of Shedeur's journey that breaks most athletes, the reality where no outcome ever fully counts. When Cam Newton described Shedeur's situation as lose-lose, he wasn't being dramatic. he was being precise. Because for Shedeur Sanders, public perception has never operated on a fair scale. If he plays well, the credit doesn't fully belong to him. People say it's because of his father. The coaching, the exposure, the platform. If he struggles, that same platform becomes a weapon. Suddenly it's proof he was overrated all along. There's no middle ground, no grace period, no learning curve allowed. And it goes deeper than performance. If Shedeur speaks confidently, he's labeled arrogant. If he stays quiet, he's called soft. If he celebrates, he's flashy. If he doesn't, he's not a leader. Every action gets twisted into something negative depending on who's watching. That's the trap, and most young players fall right into it. What makes this different is how early Shedeur understood the rules of the game. He realized something most people never do: you can't win the narrative battle if the rules are rigged. So instead of chasing approval, he stopped playing to the crowd. He focused on controlling his preparation, his response, and his energy. Everything else became noise. That mindset doesn't just appear overnight. Growing up as Deion Sanders' son meant Shedeur watched how public opinion works in real time. He saw how praise turns into criticism, how success creates resentment, how people build you up just to wait for the moment you slip. He learned early that validation is temporary and dangerous if you depend on it. So when Cam told him his mental had to be bulletproof, it wasn't advice, it was confirmation. Shedeur already knew that reacting emotionally would only feed the cycle. Fighting every criticism would exhaust him. Explaining himself would change nothing. The only move was consistency, showing up the same way regardless of headlines or hot takes. That's why criticism doesn't derail him. Most rookies experience this kind of scrutiny for the first time when millions are watching. Their instincts kick in, they defend themselves, they spiral, they start pressing. Shedeur doesn't. He's been navigating this exact environment his entire life. The spotlight doesn't feel heavier, it feels familiar. And that's what people miss when they talk about pressure. Pressure isn't what breaks players. Unfamiliar pressure is. And for Shedeur Sanders, this lose-lose reality isn't new territory. It's the terrain he's already mastered, which is why he doesn't flinch when everyone else expects him to. Long before draft boards and scouting reports entered the picture, Shedeur Sanders was already fighting uphill battles most prospects never face. When he committed to Jackson State Tigers, the reaction wasn't praise, it was doubt. Analysts questioned the competition level. Critics claimed he was hiding from real football. Others said his success would never translate because the stage wasn't big enough. The implication was clear: whatever he did there wouldn't count. So he went out and won anyway. Wins didn't stop the narrative, championships didn't quiet the noise. Instead, the story shifted. Now it wasn't about talent, it was about favoritism. People said he only succeeded because his father was the coach. The goalposts moved again, and instead of arguing, Shedeur kept producing, understanding that convincing skeptics was never the assignment. Then came the move that multiplied everything. When Shedeur transferred to Colorado Buffaloes, the pressure exploded overnight. Suddenly, every snap was national news. Every interception was dissected. Every win was framed as hype, and every loss was treated like exposure. He wasn't just playing football anymore, he was performing under a microscope. And the conditions weren't easy. Colorado's offensive line struggled. Protection broke down constantly. Shedeur took hit after hit, physically and mentally. Games where other quarterbacks would have folded turned into tests of composure, and through it all, he stayed upright emotionally. No finger-pointing, no public excuses, no passive-aggressive quotes, just accountability and work. That matters. A lot of quarterbacks look composed when things are perfect. Very few do when things are collapsing around them. Shedeur showed he could function and lead in chaos. He adjusted protections. He took responsibility. He kept the locker room steady even when the outside noise got unbearable. This is where his experience separates him. Most prospects are evaluated in controlled systems designed to protect them. Shedeur wasn't. He played in environments where the margin for error was thin and the criticism was ruthless. He didn't just face pressure, he lived inside it week after week with no escape. And the key detail most people overlook: he never changed who he was. Same demeanor, same confidence, same approach. Whether the narrative was glowing or brutal, Shedeur showed up unchanged. That consistency is rare, especially at that age. By the time the NFL conversation became serious, Shedeur wasn't learning how to deal with scrutiny. He had already been sharpened by it. The doubts, the skepticism, the constant moving of goalposts, all of it became preparation. So when people say the NFL will be his biggest test, they're missing the point. He's already been tested repeatedly in environments designed to break players. And he walked out stronger every time. This is where Shedeur separates himself in a way most people don't notice, not with throws, not with stats, but with restraint. In today's NFL pipeline, controversy is unavoidable. One clip, one comment, one headline taken out of context can spiral into a full-blown narrative. Most young players react emotionally. They fire back online. They defend themselves in interviews. They let the noise bleed into their performance. Shedeur Sanders doesn't. A perfect example came during the public buzz around comments made by Charleston White, which surfaced during a conversation connected to Cam Newton's platform. The situation had all the ingredients to become messy. Social media was ready, hot takes were flying, it could have turned into a distraction overnight. But Shedeur's response told you everything you need to know about his mindset. He didn't lash out, he didn't play victim, he didn't feel the need to clear things up publicly. Instead, he acknowledged that some people play characters, some conversations are meant to provoke, and not everything deserves a reaction. Then he moved on. That's rare. Most players his age confuse silence with weakness. Shedeur understands that silence is often control. He knows reacting emotionally gives power to narratives that don't actually matter, and that awareness doesn't come from media training, it comes from experience. Growing up as Deion Sanders' son meant Shedeur watched controversy long before he was ever involved in it. He saw how statements get twisted, how intent gets ignored, how outrage cycles move on as soon as you stop feeding them. So when his turn came, he already understood the rules. This is emotional intelligence, and it's one of the most underrated traits in quarterbacks. The NFL isn't just about processing defenses, it's about processing pressure, handling questions designed to trap you, managing locker rooms when outside voices are loud, knowing what deserves attention and what's just noise. Shedeur has been practicing that skill his entire life. And here's the key point, this doesn't mean he's passive. It means he's selective. He knows when to speak, and when speaking only makes things worse. He knows that reacting to everything drains focus. And he knows that controversy is temporary, but habits are permanent. So he protects his energy, his preparation, and his priorities. That's why situations that derail other players barely register with him. He's already lived through public criticism, family scrutiny, and viral narratives, and learned that most of it fades if you don't chase it. For a quarterback, that might be more valuable than arm talent. Because when chaos hits, and it always does, the player who stays centered doesn't just survive it. He controls it. Here's the uncomfortable truth the league doesn't want to fully acknowledge. The NFL is built to test talent, not preparation. And Shedeur Sanders is walking into it with a level of mental readiness that most teams aren't equipped to evaluate properly. Look at the situation he's stepping into with the Cleveland Browns. On paper, it's chaos. A fan base exhausted by decades of false starts. A quarterback room overshadowed by Deshaun Watson's massive contract. Media narratives already forming before a single snap is taken. Every throw in practice analyzed. Every comment dissected. For most rookies, that environment would feel suffocating. That's exactly why this situation scares people. The league is used to quarterbacks needing time to adjust to pressure, used to players learning how to deal with criticism, expectations, and locker room politics after they arrive. Shedeur doesn't need that adjustment period. He's already lived in a pressure cooker for most of his life. The NFL isn't introducing him to stress, it's just changing the setting. And that creates a problem for traditional evaluation. Scouts love measurables, arm strength, release time, footwork, but mental durability, that's harder to quantify. There's no combine drill for navigating a lose-lose narrative, no interview question that measures how someone reacts when success gets dismissed and failure gets amplified. Shedeur has already passed those tests publicly for years. This is where people misread his confidence. They mistake comfort for entitlement, calm for arrogance, familiarity with pressure for cockiness. But what they're really seeing is someone who isn't overwhelmed by the moment because the moment doesn't feel bigger than anything he's already faced. While other rookies are trying to earn credibility in the locker room, Shedeur understands how respect actually works. He doesn't force leadership. He doesn't perform it. He lets consistency do the talking. Veterans recognize that immediately. They can tell when someone's real and when someone's trying too hard. That's why the conversation around him feels tense. Because if Shedeur succeeds early, it challenges how the league thinks about development. It questions whether mental preparation should matter more than polish. It exposes how many quarterbacks are drafted on upside while ignoring readiness. The NFL is prepared for talented rookies. What it's not prepared for is a quarterback who's already immune to the pressure it usually uses to separate the real ones from the rest. And that's why Shedeur Sanders is walking into this league with an advantage most defenses will never see coming. At some point, the conversation around Shedeur Sanders has to mature because what's happening now isn't analysis anymore, it's projection. People keep asking whether Shedeur is ready for pressure, ready for criticism, ready for expectations, but that question assumes the NFL is introducing something new into his life. It is. The league is simply amplifying what he's already lived with since childhood. That's the disconnect. A lot of critics focus on Deion Sanders and stop there. They frame the relationship as interference instead of preparation, control instead of guidance, advantage instead of responsibility. But when you strip away the noise, what you're really looking at is something rare in professional sports. A father who understood exactly what the world would do to his son and prepared him for it anyway. Deion didn't shield Shedeur from pressure. He introduced him to it early. He didn't inflate his ego, he challenged it. He didn't promise protection from criticism. He taught him how to survive it. And that's why so many people misread Shedeur's confidence. They see someone who doesn't flinch and assume arrogance. In reality, they're seeing familiarity. Shedeur doesn't move like someone trying to prove he belongs. He moves like someone who already knows how this cycle works. Praise comes and goes, narratives flip overnight. One week you're overrated, the next you're the future. He doesn't chase either side because he understands neither lasts. That's the real advantage here, not genetics, not access, not hype. It's perspective. Most quarterbacks are still figuring out who they are when the league starts testing them. Shedeur already knows. He knows what matters. He knows what doesn't. He knows when to speak, when to stay quiet, and when letting your work breathe is the loudest response possible. That kind of clarity usually comes after years of mistakes. He gained it before the NFL ever called his name. And that's why the conversation shouldn't be about whether he'll face pressure in the league. He will. The better question is whether the league is ready for a quarterback who doesn't panic under it, one who doesn't crumble when approval disappears, one who understands that success doesn't silence critics, it just changes them. Shedeur Sanders isn't entering the NFL hopping to adapt. He's entering it already conditioned. And if there's one thing history keeps proving, it's this: quarterbacks don't fail because the moment is too big. They fail because they're unprepared for how small the applause becomes when things get hard. Shedeur already learned that lesson, which might be exactly why his story is only just beginning.